All right, so I'm going to, my topic is critical thinking is the cornerstone of freedom. I'm going to use a lot of stories of my life in India and a lot of stories of my life in America. Now, when I use the word America or Canada or the West, they all mean the same to me. So it's not that I'm geographically stupid. For me, they represent a certain kind of civilization, a certain kind of culture. And that's what I'm talking about when I use these three terms. Now, when I see the government, for me, government is nothing but froth that floats on the top of a fluid. The more dirty the fluid is, more dirty is the froth that this liquid generates. As a kid growing up in India, I always found that local goons, tyrants, freeloaders emerged spontaneously, almost in direct proportion to the culture of the underlying section of the society. This is my belief that as American society degenerates, its politics is degenerating in direct proportion. Now, this is not a mathematical formula, of course, but this is what I have come to believe in. And I would happily like to be challenged on this. My view is that to improve the quality of our politics, improvement in culture must precede. There's absolutely no way you can bring a change in the state without changing the underlying culture. Now, how is the culture destroyed? It's destroyed by making you irrational and by killing your capacity for critical thinking. This is how it happens in India, and this is how it's increasingly happening in the US. Now, I have been to 60 countries, and I have lived in 4. Other people travel the world to see the world. I don't travel the world to see the world. I travel to use the world as a mirror to understand myself. That's my only reason to travel the world. I left India for the first time 23 years back. When I left India, I decided to stop using Indian food. I stopped having Indian friends. I just wanted to have nothing to do with India. I absolutely hated it. Now, unfortunately, I have left India, but India has not left me, and I'm here talking about India. I'm still recovering from the indoctrination, from conditioning and irrationality of the society I grew up in. Now, this has been the case with me despite that I have revolted against irrationality and superstitions and authority from as long as I can remember. So that is the grasp of indoctrination on your psyche. It's so difficult to undo the damage that has happened to your brain. Now, how many of you have been to India? Just one. So what I'm going to say might help you process what you have seen in India. But of course, that's not the real reason why I'm talking here today. My interest is to show the irrationality, how irrationality leads to a tyrannical state. So to acclimatize those of you who haven't been to India, I want to tell you 2 stories. So a few months back, I was driving around the main square of one of the biggest cities in India. Visible to everyone, there were a bunch of policemen who had surrounded a kid, a teenage, maybe 12-year-old, and they were slapping him. And they were slapping him so viciously that he was virtually flying around from one policeman to another. While this was happening, these policemen had made a lot of other kids to stand there and watch them beating this one kid. Now, unlike what you might expect, these kids who had been forced to stand and watch were not afraid. They were giggling and they were making fun of the whole thing. There were a lot of people walking around in that square, families, people with kids eating their ice creams, couples. I did not see the slightest of a strain on the face of any of those. Alright, so that's my first story. And I'm going to, if you want, I can dissect this story later once I have finished my talk. But I just wanted to position you as in the Indian environment. Now, here's my second story. About 3 months back, a top federal minister of the government of India was found taking a bribe. Now, any rational crook would have, what would he have done in a situation like that? He would have started calling his friends in the government, in the intelligence bureau, in the media to help avoid escalating this situation. This is what he did. He had a goat bought and brought to his place. He fed grass to this goat and slaughtered it as a sacrifice to the goddess. Now, if you're thinking that, oh well, this minister might have come from one of the backward tribal places of India, this is where he actually comes from. He comes from, his constituency is among the richest, probably the richest, and among the most educated constituency in the country. My question is, who are the people who vote for him? Now, people often think that the problem of India is the problem of its government. And it's a politically correct thing to say because you identify a group of tyrants and blame everything on the tyrant. World Bank, IMF, American government, other Western OECD, they keep sending their economists to India to understand the problems of India. And these people come back with a very simple solution, very simple and rational solution, seemingly rational solution to India's problems. What are their solutions? They say that India should improve its infrastructure, reduce corruption, reduce regulatory control on people, make primary healthcare and primary school available to people. Now, the same rational people who have been making these kind of recommendations have been saying that given that India is a democracy and given that a lot of Indians speak good English, India would be ahead of China. But this is the reality. A few decades back, India was ahead in terms of per capita GDP, ahead of China. Today, China is 4 times richer on a per capita basis than India is. And China is growing at a significantly higher rate than India is growing at. So, what is the problem? And I think a lot of rational people, given their political correctness or whatever it is, they cannot see. They see India in a very superficial way. They fail to understand the philosophical underpinnings of that country, underpinnings of that society, how people think in that country. And my view is that problem of India is not a problem of its government. The government is only a symptom of the problem. The real problem is within the society, which is extremely, extremely superstitious and irrational. Now, what a lot of you and I consider as corruption is not how the Indian society sees it. There are common expressions in India like you can scoop butter only with a crooked finger, which is a rationalization for crookedness. And you can say these expressions in civilized society. There's another expression, well-known expression, which says dharma, which is religion, is only for the temple, which means that once you are outside the precinct of the temple, you don't have to worry about morality. Now, indeed, what age of reason, age of enlightenment has, in my view, never touched the Indian society. In many ways, the mindset is very medieval. It is grossly lacking in rational philosophical anchors. And this is what I see even among my friends who I went to do engineering with, some of the top people in that country. On top of all this, India seriously discourages critical thinking, which ensures that there's nothing to challenge dogma and superstitions. Now, in a relatively, and I can only use the word relatively here, in a relatively capitalist society like America, most rational people can see what causes what effects. You can still see it in this society. The problem is that the more socialist and collectivist a society becomes, the path from causes to effects become extremely convoluted and difficult to understand. The minds of those who grow up in such a society are entangled mess with corrupted instincts. And when you personally became aware of your own mental mess, which I tell you is extraordinarily unlikely. So when you become aware of your own mental mess, and when you try to change your thinking pattern and how you perceive the world, every single belief system and every single thinking pattern that you want to change affects hundreds and thousands of other thinking patterns and belief systems that you hold in your mind. Your mind becomes very unstable. You spend decades trying to undo the harm to your mind. Because every thinking pattern you try to correct conflicts with so many other thinking patterns. Let me give you an example. One of the earliest memories of mine as a child was of being beaten up by my teachers for asking questions. During the winter season, contrary to what you might expect, my school, instead of starting later in the day, would actually start earlier in the day. I had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning in a country where there is no heating. 4 o'clock, 4 degrees centigrade, a kid, 3-year-old kid, had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, if I enjoyed a specific subject, my teachers made it absolutely sure that I did not enjoy that subject. How could something be worth it if you enjoyed it? My teacher would come and beat me up for exactly the same reason that they would praise us some other day. If a kid did something wrong, the teacher would come and beat everyone up. So next time when something went wrong, you thought, well, maybe I should report who the wrongdoer is to the teacher to avoid being beaten up. She would beat you up for snitching. And then the next time, if you did not report who the wrongdoer was, she would beat you up for not telling her who the wrongdoer was. You just grow up utterly confused. And I'm talking about my state of mind, who always rebelled against authority and irrationality. You grow up utterly confused and cloudy in your thinking, with an a very uncertain sense of causality. your mind becomes capable of absorbing all sorts of garbage, irrational and contradictory beliefs, and superstitions. Your eyes and senses no longer experience what these senses are designed to sense. And I'm not talking anything mystical. This is how the culture structures your thinking pattern and your mind. As a kid, I was consistently forced to respect authority, never virtues. Now, the result was that you become completely, and this might sound very foreign to some people, you become completely incapable of differentiating between right and wrong. And I'm including top engineering students when I say that. You become extremely gullible. You say what sounds good, not what is the truth. And indeed, the concept of speaking the truth for the sake of speaking the truth was so alien to me that I understood it, I thought about it only when I first went to the West. In that society, critical thinking and dogma is just, critical thinking and rationality is just washed away in all these things. The system cripples you mentally. Now what happens when you grow up in this system? In this collectivist system, you face exactly the same kind of causality and irrationality. People are detached from the consequences of their action in an irrational society. And all the feedback he gets is in contradiction with how the world actually works. So you can be a thief and you actually make money and nothing actually ever happens to you. The society actually respects you. Trickery and crookedness and heavy-handedness seem to work in that society. It actually works consistently. And with those at the receiving end having no recourse to retribution. Bad behavior goes completely unchallenged and never registers in the core of your being as something bad. Now, really, real wealth creation in such a system sounds like an unnecessary waste of time and effort. Bribery and political connections seem like much better ways to make money. I'm not saying wealth, just money. Now, what happens to you as an adult? You become dull, apathetic, and non-thinking. And if you can visualize the people I talked about in my initial two stories, you might imagine the result of what I just said. You are left with no confidence. And your brain has no rational course to resolve all these issues because it has been made irrational. And critical thinking, the neurons of critical thinking were killed right in the very beginning of your life. Now, everything that you see or believe in is a floating abstraction. And often in conflict with what your senses seem to suggest. Now, in my view, it's very important to distinguish between collectivism of Mao's China and collectivism of India. I spend a lot of time in China. I spend more time in China these days than I spend in India. In China, I claim to be not an expert on China, I'm just giving you my views on China. In China, the individual is in conflict with in Mao's China, the individual was in conflict with the state. In India, the virus of collectivism has been made a part of the DNA of the society, of the individual. In such a society, they do exactly more of what created the original term. Now, try talking with an average Indian. They are very impervious to rational suggestions. They will verbally assault you if you try to extricate them from their mental slavery. And the way the societies have historically worked, I see no way out for India until the weight of its irrationality crashes that country and breaks it into smaller pieces. Now, some of you might be thinking, why am I ranting about India? How does it affect me? Now, I talked about my initial experience of India, of the West when I first left India. And to respond to that question, why should I be talking about India in this forum, I must go back 23 years back when I first came to the West. The airport was a happy place. The immigration officer where I arrived in the West addressed me as sir. And I looked around, I literally looked around, thinking, who was he addressing to? How could a bureaucrat not treat me as garbage? Now those days, 23 years back, airport security in the West was mostly courteous and prompt for most Western people. What would have been impossible to imagine those days now is very common and unfortunately very acceptable in this society. Airport security today has no inhibitions about asking people to strip off, including asking old ladies. The real problem is that people in this society now gladly do that. In Canada, when you're taking a domestic flight, you don't have to take off your shoes before you go through the airport scanner. People take off their shoes anyway. In just 23 years of my stay in the West, I have seen people, Americans and other Western people, increasingly groveling in front of increasingly mindless bureaucrats. Now, people in the last 23 years back, people here have become so impractical. They endlessly worry about so-called real or perceived discrimination. They worry endlessly about segregating their garbage. I still don't get it, all these different garbage sections, and I see that people struggle with it, and they spend so much time and effort trying to segregate their garbage. They worry about fair trade coffee. They discuss issues related with sweatshops in faraway countries about which they have absolutely no clue. They say things like everyone has the right to minimum wages, a right to free education, a right to health care. The problem is that the political correctness does not let Americans and other Western people discuss any possible fallacies in all these seemingly nice ideas. In my view, the mental virus that afflicts India increasingly afflicts those in the West. Apathy, in my view, has sunk deep roots here. Most Americans, from what I have seen, have no interest in the case of Edward Snowden, except for the orgy of entertainment that they have been going through and his suffering. And now I can be very naive, but my initial impression was, when I came to the West 23 years back, was that if something like that had happened those days, American government would have fallen very rapidly. Nothing happened this time. Not many people care about Bradley Manning or whatever his new name is, or what's happening in American Gulag of Guantanamo Bay. And I tried discussing I spent a lot of time in the US. I tried discussing these things with people I sit next to on the planes. And these Americans I sit next to, they start going around in circles, and they start responding irrationally when I talk about the American Gulag and what's happening with Edward Snowden. And that's not very different to how Indians communicate. I think it's the same virus that now is spreading very rapidly in this society. 23 years back, I lived in Manchester in the UK. The police would follow me for miles because I would work late in the night. I would walk back home because I could not afford a bus or a taxi. Police would follow me every evening or most evenings. And once I asked the policeman, "Why do you follow me?" His response was, "I cannot stop you to ask what you are up to. I just have to follow you." And that was the respect for due process and rule of law 23 years back. But today, these are just mere technicality. They have no underlying, I think increasingly there's a lack of underlying moral meaning behind due process and rule of law in the West. They are mere technicalities. And that's what I don't have TV, but that's what I've seen on YouTube. People discussing about technicalities to do with specific regulations or rules or code of conduct inside NSA. It's not about due process and rule of law when it comes to NSA and Edward Snowden, in my view. Now, a lot of Americans are very amused when they talk about how women in the developing world do not have a sense of self. I, as a child, did not have a sense of self because of how the environment I was growing up in. They don't have, a lot of grown-up women don't have a sense of independent existence. And that's why they struggle with things that you might think are so normal, forced marriages or whatever those might be. Those women just can't comprehend the fact that they have an independent existence. And when Western people are amused about these stories, they are completely correct. But then my companion on the airplane, when I fly within America, when I tell them that they are also slaves for more than half of their lives when they pay taxes and must follow extremely and increasingly stupid regulations in the US, they just don't see any connection. And the truth is that it's so easy to see slavery of other people but not see your own slavery. My view is that collectivism is increasingly in the DNA of those in the West. This individual is likely to keep doing more of exactly what created or what has been creating problems in the Western society. Slowly retracing his steps to the medieval period. So would the US become another India? From what I have seen in the last 23 years, I would not be surprised at all. My view is that Obama and Bush, however criminally minded these crooks might be, are only a symptom of the problem. The problem is the current state of the Western culture. In my view, the problem has nothing to do with tens of trillions of dollars of debt. I have been broke many times in my life. The problem is the cultural degeneration which has set in this society, in which reason and evidence has taken a back seat. So, this is my conclusion. My view is that lack of our liberty is a result of lack of freedom within our own minds. Bureaucrats and politicians are the scum of the world. They are spineless, repulsive pests, but they are often lazy and stupid. They will wither away and take to begging on the streets. If we gave up the irrationality that we have accepted and took to critical thinking. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to respond to any questions, either on India or on the US, or my views on this, or on critical thinking and rationality. I've been thinking a lot about it for the last 10 years. Of course, I owe a huge debt to J. Stuart Nelson and Richard Dawkins, who I've recently started listening to. And they have made a very important change in my thinking pattern. So I'll welcome any questions.
Have you looked for themes or ideas or institutions or anything that can be challenged by people because those themes or ideas or institutions encourage the degeneration of culture, which you see as the root cause of the problems we have?
Sorry, what you're saying is that are there institutions which are triggering the degeneration of the culture in the Western society? I think it's Hayek said that institutions are spontaneously emerge from the society. And I think I believe in it very strongly, and I think institutions are a result of the people. People start changing their thinking. It's a change in the principles, in their values, before these crooked institutions come into existence. So I don't think challenging institutions have any purpose except to actually feed them, because they are seen more by the fact that we challenge them so much. Yes, sir.
Came in late, but I was struck by your statement that you didn't grow up, at least at first, with a sense of self. At what point and how do you acquire a sense of self, personally and in general?
Okay, so I have always revolted against irrationality and authority right from the very early days of my life. But there was always this, given the society, so I was growing up in this small town where a lot of people who had probably no sense of self. I can't look into their minds, but I think they had no sense of self, no sense of their rights in the sense that it's their body and their time and their beliefs. And there was this vagueness and confusion around it. I always knew that I was me, and I did not like being beaten up. But a lot of kids, so a lot of parents would come to the school and tell their teachers, "Oh, beat up my kids, it's no problems." So my parents never did that, but it's just this vagueness and confusion that people grew up existing in. But when that's all they have seen, even if they leave the country, that pattern is so strong, it's very, very difficult to unwind it. And I have to say, I read Dale Carnegie when I was 14 years old, and I've been reading people like those for a long time. And I'm 46, so it's been about 32, 33 years, and I still sit for a while every morning and want to watch myself where my thinking is cloudy and confused and comes from irrational thinking patterns I adopted while growing up. You don't even see that because that is just your natural. It's like this. It's just real to you because you grew up around that.
Okay.
Sure. Yes, sir.
You talk about Indians in India being, like you said, not having a sense of self and being maybe gullible. What's your opinion of Indians that have moved to America? Do they kind of take that culture with them, or do you think they're maybe more free thinking because they're actually smart enough to get out?
No, they are not free thinking. They are, and you can see that in this crowd. I mean, I go to Freedom Fest, I run a similar seminar in Vancouver. How many Indians have you seen? How many Chinese have you seen? How many Africans have you seen? Not many. They, at a very fundamental level, the way you grow up, because critical thinking is like you grow up thinking of critical thinking as a sin. Critical thinking does not exist in their mind. So of course I'm not talking about everyone. I'm sure there are some very smart people, and I have an Indian friend who is very smart. He's a leftist, but at least he talks just about every other Indian I know in the US, and I know a lot. When I try to discuss these things, his response is either he walks away or he says, "You are wrong." And that's all I hear. Just the last statement on that, every Indian I know in the US voted for Obama. Okay? Now I have nothing in favor to say for the Republican Party. Personally, I find them more repulsive actually, but I do want to understand why they all voted for Obama. And that does not tell me a lot of good things about a fundamental change having taken place in their thinking. At least I would have expected 50% to have voted for Obama and 50% for the Republican Party, just to if they were not following a herd. Yes, sir.
Why do you think you were able to escape the problem?
Two or three. I have thought a lot about it. 2 or 3 reasons. My dad had a printing press, and he used to make me work right from the time I was 3 or 4 years old. Now I think that was a sort of abuse by itself, but printing process is a very you have to be rational, and you have to check everything before something goes to the printing press. Okay. If not, a single mistake in a single letter means that the whole book becomes garbage. So I had to pay attention to every single detail. I could not accept anything on faith and irrationality. So that was certainly one of the things. But again, this is a special business community they are a business community, and they are a relatively richer community in India as well. But also for several reasons, I had to change many schools over my schooling. I went to about 10 different schools in the same city. So as a result, I never had a group of friends who I stayed with throughout my schooling. So I did not have to succumb to peer pressure. I could be myself. So I guess that's all I can say, but I'm sure you can become, the irrationality. So what happens in the US is that when I first went to the UK, and when if the cop had stopped me, I would have thought he might be doing it for my own good, because here they are not impolite, they are not asking for a bribe right away. It's okay, I'm talking about cash bribe for themselves. You of course pay them official bribe. But so here it's difficult to I'm sure for some people it's difficult to see that they are tyrannical. In India, where I know no Indian I know trusts his policeman or army guy or anyone in the government. So there's a complete 100% distrust But then every Indian I know wants to shout, we want to have this Special Army Act in Kashmir so that they have full immunity to operate the way they want to operate in Kashmir. And when a rape case comes out of Kashmir, all these say, oh, these Kashmiris are bad. I mean, you know it from your own personal experience what happened. So it doesn't take much of a leap of imagination. So honestly, I don't get it. I mean, it's happening right in front of you, the irrationalities. And those people who have been to India, they might not accept what I'm saying, but it happens right here. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I can see is that, like I say, you're still working it out in your mind as to
Of
why
course.
you were different. Yeah. Okay. Did you find that the business community in general is more rational because maybe they would have to be? You said about the printing. I understand that. What about the business community in general?
Business community, as a leftist would tell you, is very corrupt, and I fully agree with you. Business community in India is extraordinarily corrupt and unethical, and the reason is that the pressures of the culture and the government and the regulatory requirements are so completely stupid and horrendous that good people, there's no way for good people to run a business. It's extraordinarily difficult. Your costs of doing business. So, for example, when I was, I don't know if this still happens, my dad, at my dad's printing press, once, and I was working with him, a labor inspector came in, and the regulation required windows and water pots, accessible water pots and windows in the setting. And he had to give a bribe because there was no window and no water pot. There was an air conditioner and a water dispenser. But that's not enough. So I started and ran subsidiaries of 2 European companies in India. Once I quoted for something to one public company, and my specifications in every way was better than anyone else's specifications. My product was cheaper, and it was an open tender. So it was all about the specifications and price. And he did not give me the order because I had not paid him the bribe. And I took my CEO, my English company's CEO, with me to talk with him why he did not give me the order. And his response was, better is not good enough. Now, how can you get away with it? I never understand how people get away with saying completely irrational things like those.
What were your parents like, or are your parents like?
A typical, the way I have described, a lot of those things existed in the family as well.
Yeah.
My dad was certainly very authoritarian, and he made me work in the office despite that I wanted to go out and play. But in the long run, it was not necessarily a bad thing for me. I learned, so just to be a bit impersonal here, I said earlier that I learned that you speak truth for the sake of truth. You say truth for the sake of speaking the truth when I arrived in the West. I had no concept that families could work until I came to the West. Now, the West gets demeaned for broken families. But I had seen no families in India. these are all sort of business relationships or hierarchical arrangements or whatever you call them. I had not experienced a loving environment until I was in the West. Now things have changed a lot, so I'm not saying it's the same anymore. But parents are, I mean, you can't really hit kids as much in the bigger cities anymore, and parents are much more nicer with their kids. And I have thought a lot about it, if that has actually, I've written a lot about India, and about 3 or 4 years back I wrote only one piece in which I said that I'm now feeling optimistic that India is finally emerging from its wretchedness. Because I see kids going to school in villages where women wear a veil, but these girls wear skirts and go to schools. And I thought for a while that maybe India was out of its wretchedness. But the more I spend a lot of time in India, even now. The more I see, the more I experience, what I think is happening is that they have just plastered a level of modernity on their unprincipled, irrational belief systems. So it has now actually become even more difficult to address the irrationality of the culture, because people are making money, so the feedback they get is that irrationality makes no difference because we are actually making money. So I think it's at a fundamental level, irrationalities might be increasing, but that's happening rest of the world as well, because people are so distracted with all their iPhones and computers. People don't have the time to sit down and think for 2 hours.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Do you think critical thinking is something that you can improve on and sharpen, or is it something like you either have it or you don't? Or you're either using it or you're not?
I think this is how I see it, and technically other people might do it very differently. But I think we are not animals, and we have a brain and a mind which makes us conscious, and that strives to achieve something higher than ourselves. It strives for higher things, and all these people that I have seen, they cannot break away from their indoctrination, but they are extremely depressed. They are extremely depressed or unhappy. So there is a flicker of need to express their creativity and do it, but the superstructure of irrationality and belief system and superstitions is so huge that once that builds up, it's very difficult to, using that a few neurons, is very difficult to chip that away. As I said, it has taken me decades to try to change that. Maybe I'm stupid, as some might say, but that's what has happened with me. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm wondering, on your journey of awakening, were you exposed to the writings of Krishnamurti? And if so, what kind of...
Sorry, say that again. Was I aware of?
Were you exposed to the writings of Krishnamurti? And what kind of effect, if you were, what kind of effect did it have?
J. Krishnamurti has been a great teacher. I have read a lot of J. Krishnamurti. I typically don't talk about people like J. Krishnamurti in a forum like this, because people associate some kind of superstitious ideas when you talk about spiritual matters. But J. Krishnamurti was a wonderful, wonderful guy, one of the most clear-thinking people. I still, given a chance, I would read him.
One of the big quotes that I love from Krishnamurti is, "Be a light unto yourself." You know,
Yeah.
be your own person.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Would you recommend or see any value in encouraging people to either internally or externally resist or challenge the demands of authority for the sake of building their own critical thinking skills? or extricating themselves from whatever depression they might find themselves in.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
The second part of the whole thing.
The whole thing. Do I see a value in people challenging authority?
Right. In order to help themselves become critical thinkers.
Well, I mean, so I was stopped by a goon in uniform in Canada 3 weeks back, and he ticketed me for a completely obscure reason. And I asked many other people I know in Canada if I had made a mistake. Now that is a written regulation, but none of the people I asked knew about it. But he still ticketed me, and for several reasons, I did not want to argue with him. I did not want to challenge him too much. And unfortunately, I have that guilt in me. Why did I not challenge him? What makes me this important that I could not challenge him? When I see a policeman harassing a homeless guy, I want to go out and help. But I honestly feel important to help because I know that very likely he will do the same to me as well, and no one will. So it's just the way we are on a slippery slope in the West, really. And yes, I hate not being able to challenge authority. I do as much as I can. And if I go back to India, the child getting beaten up in front of me, I hate myself that I didn't do anything. But those people who have been to India will tell you, those things happen non-stop in India. So I would die if I wanted to fight against it. I have spent years fighting against corruption. I've been to the President, Prime Minister's office with evidences on human rights abuses. I've taken photographs. I have done a whole lot of things. I've written in the newspapers, and all I have achieved is more the Delhi's intelligence office of police following me, trying to locate me. Nothing ever happened to anyone who was playing corrupt games. Yes, sir. Oh, okay, all right. Yes, Martha. Yes, sir.
Oh, I would make a comment about Christian Murray, who probably the greatest influence on my thinking in the past 40 years. Probably the most purely libertarian personality I've ever encountered. But his answer to the previous question would have been that you don't challenge those in authority, you challenge your own thinking. In other words, to get into the question, why do you respond the way that people in power and so forth expect you to respond? In other words, how do you kind of undo the structuring that goes on in your own mind? There's a wonderful book about Christian Murray, and I can't remember the title of it. It's a very old book, which he relates his early experiences when they were trying to make him the head of the Star religion. And they all got together, and here's he's about in his very early 20s at the time, and gives a talk to them that I don't think Ayn Rand could have improved. I'm serious. Said, you know, if you think I have all this wisdom, where do you think I got it? Where do you think it came from? Do you think it can come from within you? And if you think my ideas are valid now, what if 5 years from now I change some of my opinions? Am I supposed to call all of you up and tell you to change your thinking, or can you do that for yourself? And then he of course rejected the position. Go think your own problems through. Don't put that burden on me. But he was well, he was very introspective. I remember we used to go to Ojai and listen to it every spring for years. And
Excuse me, I don't want to interrupt what you're saying here, but we need to get to the next speaker.
oh, okay, all right.
All right. So thank you very much for coming and.